Hello, and first, thank you for the opportunity to be part of that conference. And yes, I got ill, and I'm very sorry not to be able to be in Ljubljana. And if I need a short break to drink something because my throat is very sore, I'm sorry about that. Before I begin, I would just like to mention that I allowed myself to write the Nuremberg University of Music beside my name because I just started my second master there. And I'm very happy that that department for interdisciplinary music research with the focus on human-animal studies was finally created there. And it is actually the only department in Europe where you can learn about music making from the non-anthropocentric point of view and from the point which is not based on Western, usually still sexist paradigms about art music. So in my presentation, I will illustrate how important the sound can be when talking about other than human animals and their agencies, and how many animal species, apart from I'm sorry, my slide is not moving. Okay. And how many animal species, apart from human, could be not only seen as ethical agents, as Tomasz Gorszownik argues in his book Animal Ethics about overspecies hospitality, but can be seen as musical agents as well. We often speak about animals as passive, silent beings who are not able to use their voices to defend themselves or to express their needs and demands to their oppressors. But how often do we really take time to listen to them? With the introduction of the fields such as zoomusicology, applied ethnomusicology, and interspecies communication, I will try to explain how we can shift that perspective. And I will do that by leading you through my journey, basically, of discovering that fields and of searching the ways to connect them. So I started my research as ethical vegan, musicologist and violinist, who quite desperately tried to find out how to bring out violently silenced voices of non-human animals through music. In 2015, my friend told me about zoomusicology, and my professor, Leon Stefania, helped me to get the book titled Music, Myth and Nature, or The Dolphins of Arion, from French composer and musicologist François Bernard Mache, which was published in 1983, and it's almost impossible to get. And we can find the first mention of the term zoomusicology in the chapter dedicated by that time not yet established field. And I immediately found Mache's words about the necessity, I quote, to begin to speak of animal music other than with the quotation marks, and about realization that, I quote, that music is a widespread phenomenon in several living species apart from man, an important statement to make a research about speciesism in music. In 2016, I prepared a cycle of radio broadcasts, since I work on the National Radio Slovenia, about zoomusicology and interspecies music, and I even made an interview with Dario Martinelli about main theoretical points of the field. So yeah, the second important figure of the zoomusicology is Dr. Dario Martinelli, who followed Mache and formed the theoretical background for zoomusicology, together with some other musicians and researchers, such as Jim Norman, Hollis Taylor, David Rothenberg, and Emily Doolittle, who are now known as the first generation of zoomusicologists. In 2002, Martinelli obtained his PhD dissertation titled How Musical is a Whale Towards a Theory of Zoomusicology, and in 2009, his book titled of birds, whales, and other musicians, Introduction to Zoomusicology, was published. So how Martinelli defines zoomusicology. Zoomusicology is a discipline that studies the aesthetic use of sound communication among animals. Officially, there are 4 branches of zoomusicology. 2 of them, empirical and ethological, are closer to natural sciences and deal with the work on the ground with animals, with recordings, analysis, and direct interaction, all in the close connection with biologists and ethologists. The other 2, anthropological and theoretical, are closer to social sciences and humanities. Researchers are dealing with broader philosophical and sociological issues, questioning our definition of music, aesthetics of animal music, connections between language, music, and communication, animal rights, and so on. I want to read to you a description of Dario Martinelli's thoughts from our interview about the development of different discriminations within Western music and the ways to overcome it. I'm sorry. Only in more recent times, we became convinced that music had to be something that categorized humanity. But that was a typical chauvinistic gesture, because at the same time, we were also applying that music was something Western, something male, something cultivated. So new fields started emerging. Ethnomusicology, for instance, pointed out that music is not just Western. Gender studies pointed out that there are not only male composers that are worth to be studied. Popular music studies pointed out that music is not only Beethoven and Carnegie Hall, but also One Direction and Eurovision, as much as we might dislike them. So, zoomusicology was itself a form of post-colonial scholarship. After the various forms of discrimination emphasized by those other fields, zoomusicology emphasized the speciesism discrimination and provide methodological and theoretical tools to overcome it. The end of quote. In the next years, with the knowledge about intersectionality and its importance, I prepared some papers which connected speciesism and sexism within the Western musical canon. I hoped that in that way our specific behavior would be easily understood. So I would like to read you 2 quotes. There will never be a woman composer. At best, a misprinting copyist. I do not believe in the feminine form of the world creator. Hans von Bülow. Orchestras react better when they have a man in front of them, because a cute girl on the podium means that musicians think about other things. When conducted by a man, musicians encounter fewer erotic distractions. Vasily Petrenko. So, as it was normal and unquestioned in the 19th century that a woman cannot be a composer, that represents the quote from von Bülow, one of the leading music academics of that time, and as it's even nowadays accepted, apparently, to think that women cannot be a conductor, that represents the quote from Petrenko. Petrenko is a 47 years old music director of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. Today, it is normal to think that animals are not able to be musical agents. We don't even think about the possibility for other animals to be musicians, especially not in the field of musicology and music theory. We are denying animals the possibility of creating their own culture and the possibility to express themselves artistically. But at the same time, we are so narcissistic to reinforce our own capabilities and glorify our existence based on the same capabilities to make art and to be creative. So when I understood those connections, I wanted to find ways to tell the broader audience about it and to have some social impact. That was also a time when I started to be more active as an animal rights activist. So I decided to write my master thesis with intention to expand the basic goals of applied ethnomusicology also to the non-human animal societies. And I did that with the help of zoomusicology and other fields. According to Petan and Python, applied ethnomusicology is guided by ethical principles of social responsibility, human rights, and cultural and musical equality. And one of the field's primary model is music-centered intervention in a particular community whose purpose is to benefit that community. For example, a social improvement, a musical benefit, a cultural good, an economic advantage, or a combination of those and other benefits. So I defended the thesis that with sound and music centralized intervention performed in a society which is responsible for the oppression of another non-human based society, the change can be made as well. And that intervention can be considered as an act of applied ethnomusicology work. I'm sorry. It was important for me to relate theoretical premises of the mentioned scholarly fields and test them through application in a particular situation. For this reason, I performed 2 interventions in the street where I invited people to listen to different sounds of non-human animals and let them decide if what they hear is music or not, and to verbalize what they feel while listening to those sounds. With those interventions, I tried to educate people about research done with non-human animals and their sounds, and some of those sounds were interpreted and still are as musical. On the other hand, the participating people were exposed to the sounds which documented pain and suffering of non-human animals. And my goal was to encourage people to think about non-human animals as individuals with their own needs, wishes, culture, communication system, aesthetic sense, and so on. And most of the people participating in the interventions recognized that the sounds were produced by non-human animals and expressed interest in learning more about those sounds. Some interpreted the heard music as some interpreted the heard sounds as music and were able to distinguish them from the sounds documenting pain and suffering of the non-human animals. So the results suggested their openness, the openness of the participants, for a more inclusive base on music, which is also one of the primary goals of zoomusicology. I'm sorry. So after my master degree, I realized that people would like to know more about animals and their interesting ways to artistically communicate with each other and with other species as well. So with my partner, who is a psychologist and cognitive scientist, we created interactive sound workshop for children, which delves into the sound worlds of several animals: wolves, mice, cicadas, pigs, and whales. The participants of the workshop explore the differences in how sound is used by different animal species to communicate and be creative. And they also try to find out what the animals are communicating and why and when can their sounds be seen as an expression of musical creativity. We created an educational booklet for children to be used during workshop and after. And it is the sound communication of chosen animals explained in there from the scientific and artistic point of view. So here are some photos. It was really interesting to see how children are actually involved in the topic and how sometimes they can be very surprised about some of the animal sounds. So, because I also wanted our musicians and sound artists to be more educated and involved in those already mentioned fields, I collaborated with Institute Zona, Institute for Contemporary Art Processing from Ljubljana. And together we created zoomusicological and interspecies music cycle called ethnomusicology. And I will explain the term interspecies music in a second. The first two editions of the cycle were designed as sound research that encouraged participating musicians to interact and create together with non-human animals. Each individual concert evening presented different musicians who improvised on the same music composed with sounds and music by animals, and that composition was prepared by the residence composer or sound artist. So musicians were encouraged to respond to the composition, and by doing that, they created an indirect sound interaction with animal sounds. And we wanted to extend this cycle. So the last two editions were focusing on the direct interspecies music collaboration. We invited clarinet player David Rothenberg, one of the leading interspecies musicians, to improvise with nightingales at the national parks in Ljubljana, Koper, and Sierknica, and of course to prepare a lecture about interspecies music. Here are again some photos from the event. So, what is interspecies music? It is simply the music created by several species, and one of them is usually human. The term itself was developed by Jim Norman, known for his work as a conceptual artist and as an environmental activist. In 1978, he founded a non-profit organization called Interspecies Communication, which supported artists to communicate with non-human animals through music and art, and help them to reinforce their emotional, spiritual, and cultural connectedness with them. Here I present the quote where Norman describes in a very illustrative way the work at Interspecies Communication. I quote, "Much of what I do is an attempt to break down artificial barriers, such as those that exist between art and science, home and wilderness, subject and object. I have produced the kind of Arctic expeditions you might expect from National Geographic, but instead of bringing along a bunch of guys plugging hardware to measure this and that, I bring artists whose work bridges the gap between subject and object." In 1982, Jim Norman released an album titled Playing Music with Animals, the Interspecies Communication of Jim Norman with 300 turkeys, 12 wolves, and 20 orca whales. And this album is one of the first live recorded pieces of interspecies music, which was not mixed and arranged in a music studio. On the album cover, we can read about the basic concept of interspecies music as Jim Norman himself understands it. And I quote, "Music is communication, certainly more universally understood than any single human language, and arguably as profound. Interspecies music expresses the clear and simple example of humans attempting to communicate directly with other living creatures. Like any music, it communicates the energy exchange of harmony. And like any successful harmony, the exchange is sustained as long as the participants coexist in here and now. What this suggests in actual practice is that the human must first acknowledge the other animal as his or her equal. With that last sentence, let me go back to the part of my presentation where I talk about my master's degree, because I would like to finish my talk with an example from the experiment that I performed during my master thesis research. I will play 2 short examples and ask you to have in mind the next questions. Can I identify how the animal feels? Can I hear the difference between the sound examples? And can one of the examples be seen as musical expression of the animal? Before listening, I just want to stress out that listening is very much overlooked tool to understand each other and other animals. And that in a lot of cases, if we would really take time to listen carefully, we would be surprised how well we are able to understand another being, even though we might not speak the same language. So the sound can indeed be a tool to start seeing other animals as equals. And then we could challenge and change our treatment of them. And finally, we could change the assumptions on music making, since we rarely think of the musical canon as a social construct, which is depending on social, political, and ideological beliefs. So with the help of mentioned fields, we can reconsider that and be aware of the beliefs that shape everything musical, artistic, and even academics around us. This first example is a little bit loud. I hope it will be okay. So, okay, I don't know what happened. Yeah, thank you. That was all from